Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our second webinar from the Cooee Collaborative series, which is Finding Your Voice as an SLP in Private Practice. And welcome to anyone on the call or who's watching the recording who is also not an SLP or a speech pathologist. And it's totally okay for you to be here with us watching this webinar or here with us tonight as well. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of country on the land that we're calling in from or hosting the webinar from, which is the Turrbal and the Yagara people, and recognise their ongoing connection to land, waters and culture, and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. For the speeches in the room and everyone else as well, I'd love to also celebrate and acknowledge that it is National Swallowing Awareness Day. And so that's a really beautiful day that we celebrate in our profession, and just wanted to acknowledge and bring that to the forefront. So tonight is all about a dialogue. We're going to, move fairly quickly through our four main slides and pieces of content that are all around finding your voice and what that means in relation to success, clinical excellence, and some of the mindset things that can get in the way of us really shining in our workplaces. And so that's what we're going to be exploring. If you have questions along the way, please just unmute yourself and jump on in, or if you feel more comfortable, hold them to the end for the Q&A part and we can answer them there as well. Your hosts tonight are myself, Marion. I'm the director of Cooee Speech and a speech pathologist by trade, and also Libby Hall, who is with us, who is a clinical lead at Cooee. And we also have Emma Lefevre and Robbie as well. Emma, give us a wave. Emma is one of our clinical leads at Cooee, and Robbie is one of our speech pathologists. And I think I also saw Georgia as well. And Hannah online. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining with us tonight. Okay, let's get moving. So step number one around finding our voice. We wanted to open up a dialogue around procrastination and overwhelm. So who here experiences procrastination? Hands up. Expecting to see every hand here, right? At all ages and stages of our career, procrastination and overwhelm are states that we can experience. And so what we want to do is it's quite a big talking point as well in the profession at the moment. Has anyone noticed that around stress and burnout and overwhelm and work-life balance in the profession? And one of the things that we want to be able to do when we're edging towards success is understand for each of ourselves uniquely, what does it look like for you to leave behind procrastination and overwhelm? That's a self-exploration journey that will be individual to each of you. So as you're listening now over the next minute or two, just reflecting for yourself, how does procrastination play out for you? Bring to mind a specific situation that you experience in relation to work, in relation to your role, where you put things off, write lists, rewrite lists, cross things out, whatever it looks like for you. Can we have a couple of examples, maybe in the chat box, or just if anyone's game enough yet to unmute and jump in? Maybe Libby, you can kick us off. What does procrastination look like for you?
Time pressure.
Okay.
So leaving things until it absolutely has to be done. So it's done with quite a lot of time pressure. I would say I would like to say that I don't procrastinate that much anymore. But yeah, that would be my main thing would be I work better. I feel that I work a bit better under a little bit of pressure, but sometimes I let that go too long.
Absolutely. Emma's put making plans to do something and then changing the plan. Absolutely. Planning and replanning for sure. For me, procrastination, much like you, Libby, I have often identified as like, oh, I work better under pressure. I'll leave it until the list builds up and gets big enough to motivate me to start to do something about it. Any others? How do you experience procrastination and how does it lead to overwhelm for you?
I think Zoe's put in there reorganizing hard drives.
Distraction. Fantastic. Distraction in an attempt to reorganize to gain control, for sure. Anyone else willing to share yet? Some of these topics can sometimes be a little uncomfortable. So if you're feeling a little uncomfortable right now, that's excellent because you're in the right spot. What we can't do is create any change for ourselves if we're not willing to address the issue. And this is what part of starting the conversation is all about. Procrastination and overwhelm are really, really normal states, right? We all experience it. It manifests in different ways in our lives, in our roles. And once we can start to identify and address the patterns, that's what actually gives us leverage for change. Because what it allows us to do is start to navigate something that at Cooee we talk about a lot, which is a concept called the responsibility line. And this is leading into point number 1, which is your mindset is your own responsibility. So the responsibility line is a concept that takes quite a while to unpack and really look at. Robbie's giving me a yes, I know. But what it speaks to is the 4 powers that we have available to us, which is the 4 things in our lives that we can actually control, not the things we try to control, but the things we can actually control, which are our thoughts and our feelings, our actions and our words. Much of our time is spent in trying to control or change external situations, trying to react or blame or push away or say something out there is causing this feeling in here. When we start to take control of our mindset, what we're doing is starting to understand how the stories that we tell ourselves and the meaning that we make about a situation is what influences our state. And this is quite a big piece to unpack. But if in the most practical way, if you can start to notice moments of procrastination when they happen, and start to notice what is the mindset that I have right now. And it might be as simple as I'll do this later, or if I just organize myself a bit better, I'll be able to do it. Or what is the story that runs in your mind that you believe that then gets in the way of you taking the action that you need to take in the moment when it's needed? I'm just going to pause there for any thoughts or comments if anyone wants to jump in at this point. And so another aspect as we move forward into procrastination and overwhelm is understanding how to craft your expertise. Okay, and that word craft there is there quite intentionally, because what we want to do is understand that it's going to take some time. One of the things that we see a lot in early career speech pathologists is the 2-year ego trap, which is where after a year or 2 of finally figuring everything out, we're kind of like, oh, we've got there, we're good now, we've figured it out. And I think it wasn't until I was in about my 5th or 6th year of practice that I finally came down off that ego curve and realized, actually, I've got heaps to learn. I don't think I'm going to get to the end of what I need to know in this profession in terms of how I contribute. And so be prepared and give yourself permission to go on the process. Don't feel that you need to be perfect. If perfection is a trait that runs for you, start to notice how, if you can lean more into how can I progress at this versus am I good at this yet? That question alone can give you more permission to go on the journey of crafting your expertise. The final point there, before I hand over to Libby, is repetition, repetition, repetition. There was a physio that I knew who would not elevate someone to a leadership position until they had completed 10,000 appointments. Which if you're seeing, as physios do, 50 to 60 patients a week, then you're looking at about 5 to 6 years of practice at a minimum before stepping into a mentoring role. And so he didn't consider anyone experienced enough to teach until they'd done 10,000 appointments. Now, that's not necessarily what I'm promoting as gold standard, but the principle behind it is repetition. Because what repetition allows for us is the embodiment. When you do something 10,000 times, you're no longer thinking conceptually about how do I do this. You've moved beyond that level of thinking into this is just now so automatic. My clinical reasoning, my clinical judgment, my capacity to write reports is simply so well oiled that it doesn't require the cognitive resources that it does earlier on in our practice journey. And so understanding that every time you get a new report to write and you think, oh, Lord, another one, or every time you look at your caseload for the week and think, I don't know, like that feels like a lot, or every time that trigger comes that might tend to trigger the overwhelm or trigger the movement of the procrastination or push away, can you flip it around and notice the opportunity for crafting through repetition? The opportunity that's only available when we step into that process of having the openness and the willingness and the beginner's mind to just go, I'm going to do this as many times as it takes to get really, really polished at this. And just a final point, I'm very bad at pausing for just the wrong amount of time. The final point is that procrastination and overwhelm is not necessarily an early career experience. Regardless of which role you step into, whether it's in your early career, maybe it's something at university, or whether it's stepping into clinical supervision for the first time, or whether it's stepping into leadership for the first time, or designing a service delivery model for the first time, the activity itself is irrelevant because the experience itself, if unaddressed, will be the same. Libby, there we go.
The pauses, they get me.
Oh, awful. I'll even mute myself.
So I guess, so I'm one of the clinical leads at Cooee Speech, and that's a role that I have stepped into over the last 18 months or so. And with that, it's been another learning curve for me around being able to understand what it is that I can cope with, what it is that I can actively manage throughout this process. It's always a learning curve, and there's always procrastination and elements of overwhelm that come into it. And I think in terms of being able to find your voice and be able to communicate what it is that you need, it can be really, really tricky in our profession, I think, and in a number of professions, because we want to do a good job, we want to do things really well, but then can't necessarily not always know, I guess, our cues of when we are getting overwhelmed or when we are might be procrastinating a little bit. And then a lot of the time that leads to burnout. So I think I've been very open with the team at Cooee that I experienced that before I moved to this job. But I was smack bang in the middle of burnout before I actually recognised where I was, which is very hard to get out of when you're in that state. And I think I've come into my role now because there are new and exciting opportunities for me and ability to grow and work through my kind of barriers around procrastination and overwhelm. So Marion does professional development coaching, and that has been extremely helpful for me to explore these kinds of avenues. But I also think it is also feeling okay, as Marion said, feeling okay with it being a process and not being like, I have to know how to do that. And it's kind of like that being okay with not being okay sometimes, and feeling like it's a process. I'm going to learn, I'm going to grow and develop. And that's something that I think has been really excellent for me with procrastination and overwhelm, is understanding that it's growth. It's not growth as a clinician, as a speech pathologist, but it's growth in professional, personal, and also my clinical development. So it's all three of those areas, and I've found that hard, very hard, because I've had to accept a lot of the things that I would do, that I have habits that I had that were quite well, they just didn't help me, basically. So it added to the overwhelm, it added to my procrastination. And therefore, I couldn't really say what I needed or what it is that I wanted to do. I didn't have a lot of clarity myself. And I think that's where the coaching and the team at Cooee have really supported that as well. And being okay with having it as a growth process, not really knowing exactly what to do is, I think, a really good little mantra to tell yourself as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Libby. And like that comment there around habits of thought and habits of behavior are not easy to shift necessarily because they're habitual. Right? So we've developed them over long periods of time because they've served us well in some sort of avenue. Right. We can often look at what we might think is a bad habit or an unproductive habit, and that could be procrastination or however that shows up for you. But we have to remember that habit developed because it served us in some capacity for some reason. So we can bring a bit of kindness to ourselves in that growth process as well. We don't need to stay where we are, but it is okay for us to be where we are. Both of those things simultaneously. We don't need to judge ourselves for being where we're at. We can move forward. And it's that combination of compassion and also forward movement, which is really, really powerful for growth. Now, I could talk about this all night, but before my computer dies, I'm going to plug it in. Just made it and move us on. So step number 2, as we talk about habits, habits of communication. These are probably just as difficult to shift as habits of thought. So who here struggles? Okay, first of all, who finds it hard to define your own boundaries, to know where your boundary line is? Yeah, Robbie's got two. Thanks, Robbie. Yep. Who here feels like, okay, I know what my boundaries are, but I find them really hard to stick to or communicate? Yeah, and it might be both of those categories as well. Yeah, thank you for the hands up. So setting boundaries is both about developing the self-awareness to know where your boundary line is around what you think, feel, say, and do, around the choices that you have, around how you show up, and then also having the capacity to communicate those boundaries. And so a question for you, and let's pop this in the chat. So let's hear from a few of you, or feel free to unmute yourself. What gets in the way of communicating your boundaries for you? Again, we're starting off on the tough questions. Wanting to do the best for everyone. Yeah. Worried that other people won't understand the boundaries. Beautiful. Thanks, Emma. Feel my boundaries are different to everyone else. I worry about how other people may perceive me. Thank you, Katie. Second personing ourselves and how are others going to view this is such a common thought pattern, right? Fear of disappointing others, feeling like I should be able to do it all, worrying about letting other people down, people pleasing, wanting to please everyone, make a good impression. All of these things are really, really normal. So well done and welcome everyone to the human experience, where we all have doubts, fears, insecurities, and things that get in the way of how we would actually love to show up in the world, right? Really, really normal. Second guessing whether boundaries are reasonable. Yeah, really, really normal. And this is part of what we want to do with these webinars, is start a conversation around, hey, this is okay. We all experience this at all stages of our career. And what we want to do is, through dialogue, through these kind of explorative conversations, is for each of you, the offer is start to notice what it is for you. Self-awareness is the key to changing habits of thought and habits of behavior. So again, have a specific situation in mind where you notice the way you do communicate or where you hold back from communicating. Write it down for yourself. Just take a moment. If you're watching this recording later on, just pause the recording and take a moment. Where do you not stick to your boundaries. Maybe it's in the professional role where the administrative team asks you to do something and you just don't feel like you can say no to them. Maybe it's with a client. Oh, God, clients all of the time, right? And they say, can you have this report by next week? Yeah, absolutely. And the words are out of your mouth before you've even thought about it. And then you go away and you think, no, not a chance. Now look what I've done. Yeah. Maybe it's in relation to someone that is in management or in leadership, and you find it really hard to communicate thoughts, feelings, boundaries back to them in relation to a request. And so if you can identify specific scenarios and some of the things that you're holding on to that live inside them, some of the attachments that you have or the things that you might be valuing, like people pleasing or preferencing other people, and then you can start to notice those patterns at play. And that's what self-awareness or emotional intelligence is in a nutshell. Knowing what are the habits that run for you. How do they run? What do they look like? Dragging them out of the shadows of things that we don't really like to admit to ourselves and bringing them into the foreground and having a look at them and going, how does this thing turn up in my life? And now that I've got to know it a little bit better, I've got a bit more capacity to choose to do something different. Because you cannot change a habit, particularly a habit of thought or communication, that you are pushing into the background and not having a look at. Yeah, oh, no, it's only sometimes, and it's not all of the time, and I'm okay now. That was last week and it was a bad week anyway. Right? But if we can start to find the micro moments where these patterns play out for us, that's where we can start to actually create some shift for ourselves. Right? It's very difficult to try and move an elephant out of a car. Some a really big situation that's just all over the place and now it's all gone everywhere and you're trying to change that situation. Really, really difficult, very heavy to lift. If you've got just like a small cockroach, now that might be more gross for some of you, but much, much easier to move out of the car because it's small. Yeah. If you're trying to change a pattern in your life, find a small way to start to shift that. If you've got difficulties with saying no or saying, actually, I don't really want to right now, or that doesn't feel good for me, or I can't commit to that without putting myself second, practice saying that in the small things. Find a circle that you're more comfortable saying that in and practice it there to get a bit of flex in that particular pattern for yourself. Give me a nod if that makes some sense, because we're covering quite a bit of ground here. So the key is you can't change a habitual way of thinking if you're not ready to look at it. So when you're looking at things like procrastination, overwhelm, or unhealthy versions of communication, what you want to do is go, how does this play out for me? What's the pattern that's happening here? Recognize the desire to people please or overwork. Recognize your own values, what you tend to hold on to too tightly. You might deeply value the quality of your reports and just be absolutely obsessed with getting it really, really, really good. But because of that, they take you 5 weeks to write. Right? Each value has an upside and a downside. When you overvalue it too much, you start to experience the downsides of overvaluing that value. When we hold on to things too tightly. There's Loki. And so we want to create flex in our values, right? Maybe the value, and we've recently done this at Cooee in a values exploration session, maybe the value is respecting others versus respecting yourself. And do you tend to sit more at one end of that value than another? And how does that play out for you? Because there are upsides and downsides of both. So again, deep self-exploration with some of this stuff, right? We're talking about values, fears, insecurities. These are patterns that play out in all of us, and they have all been acquired over time So they can all be let go of over time as well, if we're willing to look at them. Libby, what does this look like for you?
Sorry, I need to unmute. Apologies, my cat's coming in and out on my lap. I think the biggest thing has been, I think, finding a really a healthy way to communicate, a respectful way to communicate, and understanding my own role within that. It's been probably, this area is what I've worked on most with Marion in coaching over the last 2-3 years. I've gone from a very, very small team of working with maybe 1 or 2 other people to quite a large team, all with very different communication styles. We all have different things that we place a lot of value on. And I think understanding that we all want the same thing. However, it is up to me, Marion spoke about the responsibility line a little bit earlier, it is up to me to be able to say no, which is hard and really challenging to say no when you do want to please. We work in a care-based profession, like if we're speechies and OTs, we're in it because we care, we want to do things, we want to support our clients, we want to support the people who we work with. And overdoing it early on creates these habits that are very hard to then realize that, oh, this isn't healthy for me, and this is a challenge, but oh, I'm in too deep and I can't really say how I need to get out of this. I think the other factor that's kind of played in over the last, definitely since I first started in the profession to now, so that makes it much more challenging, is the way that the practices change. So, and the technological revolution. So, you know, we do telehealth, we do online professional developments, we, like tonight, we do all these things that are online and kind of flexible with their times. But then we, like, I know for me, I've felt doing recorded professional development sessions that I need to do that outside of all my other time, at night, in my own time. And that's been a really hard, well, not been hard, it's been a journey, because I've coached by Marion around understanding, like, well, when would I have done that? Like 5 years ago, I would have done that on a clinical day. I would have gone and I would have spent 7 hours paying attention to that CPD. And it's such a shift, but being able to communicate to clients and not feel guilty and not feel like I'm doing something wrong because I want to go and do a professional development now is still a challenge. And I think understanding that communication, like communicating in a clear and healthy and responsive way, and also really respectful, not just to other people, but also to ourselves. And I think that's a really important thing that we sometimes forget as we're working, is that we also need to give ourselves that care and kindness, and understanding that it's okay to be like, hey, I can't do this, I need this, and asking for things. I don't know about everyone else, but sometimes it can be really hard to ask for help, and it can be really hard to ask for some space, or with people that you work with, or with clients as well, like Marion was saying. And that's, I think that's also been a big learning curve for me as well, is being able to trust other people that I work with, believe that they're going to support me and do the best by me. But that's only going to work if I also communicate my needs nicely and clearly and respectfully.
And just to add on to that, one final point is timeliness of communicating your boundaries as well is a really important thing, right? Sometimes some personality types can tend to not communicate. Oh, no, it's okay. No, it's okay. All right, it's no longer okay. It's like really sending missed messages about our boundaries. And so as we can practice timely, clear communication, first time, every time, we can show up more authentically and with more integrity with what we're actually intending to do, right? Integrity is around, has the intention that I have on the inside actually been expressed on the outside? Is there alignment between those two things? Or am I saying one thing but thinking something different actually, but I'm not going to mention it this time because, for all of these other reasons. So as we can create more integrity within ourselves, our communication gets cleaner, might get more direct as well, right? We can sometimes lose a little bit of the fluffiness around it, but it allows for greater integrity to come through. And that is really what a lot of boundary setting looks like. Clear communication in a timely way that is responsive and actually in line with what the situation is requiring, not just what you're telling yourself you should be doing or something that should be happening, or whatever story that you're creating about the situation. All right, we've covered a lot so far, but we're going to keep it moving. So stepping into pursuing clinical excellence. So if we're looking at finding our voice and we're like, okay, we've really done a bit of an exploration around procrastination, overwhelm, we're getting better at boundaries. We also want to have that forward drive, right? And I think for most of us in speech and in occupational therapy and in allied health in general, we come into it because we want to do a really, really good job. And at Cooee, we are unapologetically driven towards clinical excellence. We really, really want to do a good job. Not because, maybe to some degree we've got hang-ups about it and about needing to do a good job. And I'm sure that's probably where it started for us, but also because our clients expect that, right? Quality service matters. Making a difference matters for our clients. Being excellent at what we do is just where we want to be sitting in the field. And so to do that, we need to be able to understand our own why. Why is it that we love doing what we do? Because that will ignite your passion. That will ignite your motivation to stay on track when things are feeling squeezy or hard. Understanding that we don't want to settle, we don't want to be complacent. Cultivating drive and excellence is really healthy. Having ambition, but avoiding perfection. Being a perfectionist, if that's something that feels really good for you, is a very, very dangerous trap. Because perfect is static. It either is or it isn't. Right? But if we can cultivate drive, move towards excellence, have a forward progressiveness to how we seek things, that is a really healthy version of excellence. Part of that process will be surrounding yourself with mentors. There's a common saying in business and in business development that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Yeah. Very, very early on in my career, I started going to, probably at the end of my first year of practice, I started connecting in with Speech Pathology Australia because I was like, I'm all on my own here. That's what it felt like. And I surrounded myself with women who had been in private practice for much, much longer than me. And the gold that I got just from rubbing shoulders with people who are now, 10 years later, really good friends of mine, has been incredibly powerful for my clinical excellence. Just the bits that you pick up by hanging around people who've been where you've been. Yeah. So if you have surrounded yourself with your peers, great, you've got support. Also look for some mentors. Also look for some people who have been there or a few steps further in their journey than you are. If you've got the openness and the willingness and the beginner's mind to take on board what they will share with you. And the final point on this slide is don't expect to double be provided all of the answers. For those of you who are grammar Naziing my slides, don't expect to be provided all of the answers, right? Because that's just not how it works. Part of clinical excellence and drive is you moving yourself forward. Workplaces will support you to varying degrees and in different ways with all sorts of different structures. And no one else can do it for you. Excellence will start with you wanting to drive yourself forward. Libby.
Yeah, so I think pursuing clinical excellence, I think, is part of, it's a big passion area of mine in various ways. I think being able to be, it helps being confident, it helps us feel like we're doing things that we value, helps us kind of engage and interact with our peers as well within the profession. I think, I guess I was kind of similar to Marion. I was all on my own when I first started out, and I got involved with Speech Pathology Australia as well. Had to find my own supervisor and mentor, which I think is probably what I wanted to bring into this discussion, is having, like, understanding the difference between a clinical supervisor and a mentor, and the benefits of both as well. So you know, supervision is really those clinical skills, really focusing on that clinical development, and mentoring can include the development of the clinical skills, but also the overall growth and development of you as a practitioner. And I think I view that as clinical excellence as well. We can absolutely focus on a niche area and learn and go into it in great depth, but it's really important that we are growing outside of that knowledge. So one, we can communicate really clearly, and we can set really great boundaries, and we can feel like we are a part of a team, or we're adding some element to discussions and feeling confident with that, and that we're not just seen as this one little individual. Like for those who've got experience in the hospital system, like, that's what the speechy does, that's all they do, and not feeling like we can contribute to conversations outside of that very small little area. I think part of what we do really well at Cooee is really put a focus on clinical excellence, and it's been an absolute amazing thing to see when we took on new grads 2.5 years ago. It has been absolutely wonderful to watch them grow and develop as clinicians, and they are just fantastic and such a joy to work with. And so it's been really wonderful to see them grow and pursue their own clinical excellence, and the take that they bring into the team that is so valued and helps the rest of the team grow and continue to pursue our own excellence as well. And I think that balance, having that balance of support and challenge, whether you are in a supervisory role, a mentoring role, a clinician role, having that support and challenge balance is really important to craft your own clinical expertise. And it is kind of like having somebody, whether it's a peer, a supervisor, or a mentor, to question, to help you lead to your own answers, to develop that. And that's been something that I've really valued working with our younger clinicians. Is it's a fresh take. There's always new research out there. There's always new ways of doing things. And particularly, like, we're a speech and OT practice, and working collaboratively with the OTs has led to another kind of growth and development in the clinical excellence way. It's a really fresh perspective. It's really excellent, and it challenges me as well. Like, I've got to be like, oh, why do I think like that? And so that balance, support, challenge, I think, is really important, no matter what you're aiming to grow and develop in. And I agree with Marion that perfectionism can really dig you into a hole. And being, going back to what I said earlier, being okay with not being okay or not knowing everything, and also being upfront and honest about that. And that's part of, communicating as well. It's being like, hey, do you know what? I actually don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. I need you to give me a few days, or I'm going to research, I'm going to check it out, and I'm going to get back to you in a week in our next session. And I think that leads to that self-drive and that autonomous learning as well, which is really important to have that pursuit and to grow and develop as much as you can. I think I just
Thank
spoke
you.
for a long time. So, but yeah, that's my
Good.
piece for clinical excellence.
Absolutely. We've got one more slide to go, but before we shift into that, I'm going to ask everyone to just pop into the chat. What does success in your role look like to you? I know that's another really big question, and it's like, Marion, we've done our 40 minutes, we're done now. But let's give it a go. What does success look like? Just a sentence or a phrase or a couple of thoughts. What does success in your role look like to you? You know, because if we're looking at procrastination, overwhelm, communicating our boundaries better, we're pursuing clinical excellence. Okay, what is the end result here that we're going for? Libby's
Can I
got.
just ask, is that question in relation to client outcomes or your feeling about your role? Or is that or both?
That is exactly the question, isn't it? How do you define the success? How do you know that you're on the right track? What's the marking stick that you use? And there's no right or wrong here. So we've got lots of supporting clients, high quality services to the clients and the team, helping clients achieve their goals, focus on being the best that I can be rather than just grades. Achieving goals with clients, being confident without second guessing myself. Beautiful. Thank you, everyone. So what we're going to do now is talk a little bit about success, right? If we're looking for excellence, well, what's success? Not that there's an end point, because we're not going for perfect. We're going on a journey with it. But what we want to do is be able to really understand, what does success look like in each of your roles, and it will be unique, right? But this pie chart here is based on an integral approach, which is a body of research around integral theory, which essentially covers the 4 aspects that lead to a holistic viewing of a situation. Okay, so in the upper left of that pie chart, you've got your self-leadership. You know, there was a comment in there on being confident and not second guessing myself, being able to have, you know, what we've talked about around procrastination, overwhelm kind of sorted out, to have really healthy mindset. That would be successful, right? Feeling confident, feeling good on your inside when you go to work. That's one aspect of success, absolutely. And it cannot be left out. And it's also not the whole picture. A lot of you mentioned being able to work well with a team, or being able to work well with your clients, or, you know, being in that interpersonal space, successfully navigating your relationships and meeting the outcomes of your relationships with clients and with the team. The interpersonal skills, also really important, and also not the whole piece. In the upper right, a lot of you mentioned goals or metrics or numbers, achieving your own goals. Maybe there's KPIs in your position. Maybe there's utilization, percentages that you need to achieve or work towards, or billable hours or some version of that. And that is a really important piece of success, and it's not the whole piece. All of these are relevant, and all of them are partial in the whole picture. And the final piece is systems, around how do you fit in, and your role, how does it fit in with the wider team as a whole within your organization? Are you able to step into and utilize the systems, the technologies that are available or expected in your role? Can you navigate the dashboards that you use and the client management systems that you use? Can you develop new systems and policies and procedures when you need to? Can you incorporate and understand how they work in your role in the organization? Again, it's a piece of the whole. And so holistic success is really being able to start to address all of these areas. You may find, as we've gone through those 4 areas, that 1 or 2 of them felt a lot more relevant to you than the others. Did anyone notice that? Yeah, that's because all of us have a bias towards and away from some of these quadrants more so than the others. Again, habits of thought. What do you tend to not look at? Do you tend to not address the self-leadership aspect and focus more on the interpersonal results, or what you perceive to be those? Do you focus so much on your numbers that it's to the detriment of relationship? Do you absolutely avoid systems because you hate them? Don't tell me about a new policy. I don't want to know. Where are your biases and your preferences? And so you can take action across all 4 of these areas, right? Starting to address your own mindset and lead yourself through some of your habitual thoughts and patterns, develop your interpersonal skills and your relationships with others in a way that allows you to achieve your numbers goals really effectively and not to your own detriment, that fits in with the business as a whole. All 4 of those aspects working together in unison. Libby, anything to add in here?
I think this was a really big learning curve for me to understand that success was something else other than my numbers and that my value and worth within a team is more than just that one aspect. And it's been a really big journey and has, I think, added to growth, development, me feeling much more confident and feeling like I can do the various things that I do, the various jobs that I have at Cooee currently, but also have a different understanding of what success is. And I think this has, and I feel that this changes over time and where you are at in your career as well. And I think that's a really great thing, and recognizing for me where I'm drawn to and what I want to do, and not discounting the other aspects, because that can lead to things like overwhelm and burnout and the inability to also communicate what I need to do, because I'm not looking at all of the aspects that are really important into playing within the space that I'm at. And it's also helped me to explore what else can I offer, what else can I grow, what else can develop to help me feel more successful in the space that I'm in. And also part of that as well is being able to step in and out of roles or in and out of pathways that we've got at our workplace, and be okay with that and not view things. I think one of the coaching sessions I did with Marion was, I think a sentence I said was, I feel like failure. And that was just one of those, as Marion was saying before, one of those narratives that was playing in. And it's, you know, every time that something doesn't quite go to plan or it doesn't work out as I want, you can look at it as a growth opportunity. So what aspect was missing? Mm-hmm. What wasn't I paying attention to? What wasn't I giving that kind of, and generally it will be one of them. A lot of the time for me, it's systems. I'm not great with systems or necessarily the interpersonal. So it's, and because I miss those areas, it's like failure can feel really awful and really awkward, but I feel much more comfortable with it now, being like, okay, this didn't actually work. What did I miss? What haven't I, like, what have I counted? What have I discounted at the same time? And that makes it a real growth kind of pathway, and me viewing and valuing success in a lot of different ways. Knowing where what I do discount as well, or what I don't necessarily have strengths in, has been extremely helpful for when I've had to do projects or work with other team members who do have strengths in those areas. And that's been really beautiful, is pairing up, like our other clinical lead, Emma, we are almost the opposites in what we see, and that's led for some really wonderful things working together and playing into each other's strengths, but also that balance of challenge and support as well, of recognizing, hey, you haven't thought about this, or you haven't, you know, let's move into this space. And that's been really, really awesome. And I think a lot of it's a lot to take in. It's a lot of information. It's a lot of personal work and self-work. You know, if you can focus on it, work through it, it can lead to some absolutely wonderful relationships, wonderful you know, ability to take on feedback and working in a team, and also working individually as well.
Absolutely. In these 4 areas, there's an analogy that, you know, activating all 4 of these areas in your role, whatever that looks like for you, to the degree that you don't, it's like trying to drive a car without one of those wheels. Right. So when we talk about failure, it's like, okay, we can get to the point where, you know, maybe we're trying to drive a car with just one wheel and it's like it just doesn't really work very well, you know, or maybe it's a wheel and one that's like half flat. It's like maybe you're really focusing on your numbers and, you know, trying to do a little bit of the self-leadership and knowing what you want and where you want to go, but the interpersonal skills are falling flat. And your ability to navigate and use systems around self-organization and procedures is really letting you down, right? If you can start to see those blind spots, to see those biases, that's where you're going. You've got your opportunity to start to rebalance, pump up the tires that aren't working as well, and get a bit of a smoother ride in moving that drive and ambition forward. It's a beautiful analogy because it's really easy when you have a preference. So my preference is the systems quadrant very strongly, right? And yeah, Libby, I know. And it's really easy for the quadrant that you preference to be like, no, but this one's more important than the others. And to really want to restrict yourself to viewing through that lens. But as you can start to broaden out your viewing to include all 4 of these aspects, you start to get that smoother ride. You start to not rebalance, because it's not necessarily around equality, but you start to be able to have better navigation is probably an extension of the analogy. You get to be more responsive to what the road in front of you needs. All right, so let's move us on. That is the end of the formal part of tonight. So next steps here, what we're going to do is elaborate a little bit more on what we've spoken to tonight in our ebook, which will come out within the next week. So in signing up to this webinar, you've also unknowingly joined the Cooee Collaborative. Welcome. What that means, and you can really explore this on our website as well, cooeespeech.com.au. We want to continue the conversation, and that's what the collaborative is all about, with webinars, with a newsletter, which we will send out. And it's really old-fashioned to call it a newsletter, isn't it? But we want to continue the conversation. We want to have some networking events. We want to get together, and we want to start to bring together this intersection between personal development, professional skill set, and clinical excellence, and start to hold community dialogue about that. And so you will see some stuff coming through an email. If it's not right for you, feel free to unsubscribe. But our ebook will be coming out as part of that. You can also rewatch the recording on our website, and we'll put that up within the next week. If you would like to take action on the base of this call, what you can do is jump on a complimentary coaching call with me. How can you do that? You can head to our website, to the Cooee Collaborative page, and there are links there to book straight into my calendar, Libby's calendar for a mentoring call, Emma's calendar for a mentoring call, Hannah's, our clinical lead OT, who's on the call tonight as well, if you'd like to jump in with her. And Robbie, give us a wave, Robbie. Robbie doesn't have a Calendly invite, but her email's on the screen. Unlucky, Robbie. So if you would like to chat with Robbie about the, the early career experience, she has also kindly said that she would love to jump on a call with anybody who wants to do that. I'm going to just put that address in the chat. So you can book those calls straight in there, mostly because we want to continue the conversation. We want to stay connected with you. We're going to have some more webinars as we move forward. And so you're very welcome to reach out and chat with us about where you're at and how we can support you as part of the wider Cooee community. Beautiful. I'm going to pause the recording or stop the recording